We have a data set of exactly 305 extant poems that originated during the Shang and Zhou periods, spanning from roughly the 17th to the 3rd century BCE. This collection is known as the Shijing, the oldest existing collection of Chinese poetry. Historical records indicate that this specific corpus is the result of an aggressive editorial filter. Confucius himself reportedly curated these 305 pieces down from an original, sprawling collection of over 3,000 ancient songs. Because it consists of poetry, modern readers often approach the text as an anthology of art. In practice, it operates as a vital historiographical database for researchers studying early China. The text holds highly specific data points. Historians use it to reconstruct early Chinese institutional history, mapping out court rituals and agricultural cycles, while linguists rely on it to decode archaic phonetic patterns that have since vanished from the spoken language. This matrix illustrates the core architecture of the text, known as the Liui, or 6 meanings. This classification system divides the poems into specific formal and rhetorical categories. Analyzing the data within the Shijing requires deconstructing this ancient framework. By organizing these ancient songs into a 2-dimensional grid, early scholars created a structural model that became the technical standard for traditional Chinese literary theory. This diagram shows the vertical y-axis of the Liui matrix. It organizes the poems by musical form, dividing them into 3 distinct tiers that correspond directly to the social classes of ancient China. At the wide base of the pyramid sits the Feng, or airs. These are 160 regional folk songs. They originate from the lower classes across the various regional states, and they often center on everyday themes like courtship and love. The Zhou dynasty court used these folk songs as a political tool. The royal house systematically collected the airs from across the regional states to gauge public sentiment and assess the mood of the empire's rural population. Moving up the pyramid, we reach the middle tier, the Ya, or odes. This tier is further subdivided into major odes and minor odes, organizing the songs into specific clusters or decades. Unlike the regional airs, the odes have a strictly aristocratic origin. Upper-class composers wrote these pieces and submitted them directly to the throne. The major odes were performed at the royal court, while the minor odes were sung at the courts of regional rulers. Together, these bottom 2 tiers form an acoustic map of the living empire. They capture a complete cross-section of socio-political concerns, spanning from the hardships of rural peasants to the leisure activities and political maneuvers of court officials. At the highest tier of the y-axis sits the song, or hymns. These 40 pieces are distinct from the lower tiers. They are highly formalized religious chants. The context for the hymns was strictly limited. They were performed within the ancestral temples of the royal house of Zhou, the state of Lu, and the descendants of the Shang dynasty. Executing these hymns required heavy, elite instrumentation. The texts were chanted alongside massive cast bronze chime bells, anchoring the poetry in a physical, ceremonial reality. The royal courts employed massive ceremonial drums to accompany the chants. The physical scale of this musical setup differentiates the hymns from the unaccompanied folk songs sung by the peasants at the base of the pyramid. Because of their strict institutional setting, the hymns serve as direct historiographical evidence. They preserve the specific rituals and organizational structures of the late Shang and early Zhou periods. While the airs and odes project the voices of the living population, the hymns operate as the official voice of the state, engineered to communicate with the dead. Returning to the matrix, we shift focus to the horizontal x-axis, which categorizes the text through 3 stylistic devices, Fu, Bi, and Sheng. The Tang period scholar Kong Ingda analyzed this framework in the 7th century. He concluded that while the vertical y-axis denotes musical forms, these 3 terms on the x-axis describe methodological approaches to writing. They dictate how the poet handles the information. The first device is Fu, meaning straightforward. Fu is a direct, highly descriptive method of writing designed to deliver didactic information without literary embellishment. The prime example of the Fu style is the poem Qi Wei, or 7th month. The text functions as a literal, step-by-step instruction manual for rural agricultural life, stating when to track the stars and when to distribute winter clothes. The utility of this poetry is recorded on this scroll, mapping the literal text of Kiyue alongside visual depictions of peasant life. The Fu style prioritizes accuracy. Words track directly to the physical agricultural tasks required to keep the ancient empire fed. The second device, Bi, operates through simile or parable. In the poem Shu Shu, the author uses Bi to map scheming, exploitative aristocrats to the image of large, grain-stealing rats. The x-axis reveals how ancient authors packaged their ideas. Fu delivers raw, unvarnished agricultural data, while Bi encodes political critiques inside animal comparisons. The third stylistic device is Sing, translated as atmospherical introduction. It is the most complex of the three methods. The visual mechanic of Xing involves presenting an image of nature that has no logical connection to the core topic of the poem. We see this in the first poem of the collection, Guanju. It opens with the calls of ospreys on a river islet. The birds do not feature in the narrative. They are atmospheric framing to set the mood for a poem about a prince seeking an ideal spouse. Beneath the rhetorical devices of Fu, Bi, and Xing, the poems adhere to a strict linguistic code. The Shijing provides the primary evidence for ancient phonology, preserving the phonetic values of an otherwise silent language. This diagram of Guanju shows the text's foundational metrical structure, a predictable four-syllable rhythmic grid. Within this grid are specific phonetic markers. First is dieyun, double rhymes sharing a vowel, like yao tiao. Second is shuangsheng, repeated initial consonants seen in sensei. A third structural marker is diezi, the direct repetition of words to build the internal, driving rhythm characteristic of the regional folk songs. Because the poets adhered to these rigid rules of rhyming and syllabic structure over 2,500 years ago, historical linguists can track the patterns to reverse engineer exactly how archaic Chinese sounded before it evolved into modern dialects. A dataset containing this level of specific political and linguistic information requires an unbroken chain of transmission. How did a collection of 305 ancient texts survive the turbulence of antiquity? During the 3rd century BCE, the first emperor of Qin initiated a severe literary inquisition, ordering systemic book burnings to erase competing historical records. The Shijing bypassed this physical destruction through a structural loophole. Because the poems were musical, they were deeply embedded in the oral tradition, allowing scholars to transmit the data without relying on physical bamboo slips. During the Han Dynasty, scholars transcribed the oral traditions back into writing, fracturing the text into 4 versions. The Qi, Lu, and Han versions formed the state-backed New Text tradition. The Mao version, transcribed in archaic characters, represented the outsider Old Text tradition. Despite receiving the resources and protection of the Han imperial court, the 3 New Text versions slowly degraded. By the end of the Song period, they were entirely lost to history. The surviving text we rely on today is the Maoshi, the underdog Old Text lineage passed down by Confucius's disciple Zixia, which outlasted its state-sponsored rivals. This completed matrix illustrates the fully populated architecture of the text. It locks the vertical socio-geographic categories of the airs, odes, and hymns together with the horizontal rhetorical devices of Fu, Bi, and Xing, all resting on the surviving foundation of the Maoshi lineage. The value of this dataset is multidimensional. It provides a vertical map of Zhou social classes and a horizontal map tracking the development of ancient rhetorical sophistication. It functions as a political history detailing the early Chinese state apparatus and as a technical resource for reconstructing archaic Chinese phonology. Confucius instructed his disciples using these poems, stating that without the Shijing, there was simply nothing to talk about. The Shijing is an engineered, surviving matrix. Its internal rules for rhyme and social categorization established the specific rhythmic and rhetorical templates that governed centuries of Chinese literary production.